Let's get back onto this story of the day then, and the Scott Morrison secret ministry story. I want to catch up again with Anne Toomey, the Professor of Constitutional Law at Sydney University. Thanks for joining us again, Anne. We've now seen the Solicitor General's advice on this in detail. As expected, of course, there's no law being broken, but his observation that the Prime Minister's actions were inconsistent with responsible government, as outlined in the Constitution and various interpretations of it, it's pretty damning, isn't it?
It is. I mean, look, this is an issue that, there's no constitutional breach in terms of a capital C constitution. There's no, actual rule being broken there. But there is a breach of the Constitution in a small c sense, because the way our Constitution operates is that it is underpinned by fundamental principles, like the rule of law, responsible government, separation of powers, those sorts of things, and also conventions. And, conventions about accountability and transparency. So there are very important fundamental breaches that have occurred, even though the appointments themselves were legally valid.
You don't need to be a constitutional lawyer, I would think, although in your case it helps. But to make judgments about this, everybody understands that accountability and transparency are very, very important. And I thought the Solicitor General's observation that the Parliament would not know. How could the Parliament hold a minister to account if the Parliament's not even told who has the authority over particular portfolios?
That's right. And he also pointed out, rightly, that how would a public servant know that they were supposed to be taking instructions from or giving, advice to a minister without knowing that they were the minister of their department? I mean, he points out that this causes a real breach between the public service and the ministry, as well as that accountability breach with the Parliament. And the other thing he said, which I think was quite telling, was that it didn't matter whether or not Mr. Morrison actually exercised those powers. It was the mere fact that legally he held them meant that he couldn't be held to account, not only for what he might have done, but what he didn't do. So, even though he's not exercising them, there's still an accountability issue as to holding someone to account for what, for powers that they have that they didn't exercise. And so for that reason, this is not just a kerfuffle over nothing. It is actually important.
Yeah, and therefore it's important to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that's easily done, isn't it? We've effectively seen that the Governor-General could just declare that as part of practice, whenever they sign any appointments, they'll publicise them. Or, if we want to put that into law, you could pass legislation to make that mandatory. And I think the Coalition would vote in favour of that tomorrow.
I think so. And of course, also your independence, etc., usually place a fairly high value on transparency would too. So there'd be no trouble getting that through Parliament. I can understand why the government wants to, in the short term, fix this by just arrangements between Prime Minister and Cabinet and the Governor-General and leave any legislation till a bit later, just in case there's anything else that comes out that they want to fix as well and put it together in a package. But you're right, the fix is relatively easy. This is not a complex matter.
So why another inquiry? It strikes me that we know all we need to know and that the government's going for another inquiry just to try and wreak political havoc amongst the Coalition.
Well, that's one argument, but I think we don't know all we need to know yet. And that's actually one of the more remarkable aspects of the Solicitor General's opinion, because he's been given a tiny bit of information. All the extra information he got was that, yes, the documents went to the Governor-General, came signed, back to PMNC, and PMNC didn't take any action in passing them on to other departments or relevant ministers. So that's all we know that happened. We don't actually know why. We don't know whether there was an instruction from the Prime Minister to keep these secret and not follow the normal practice. We don't know what legal advice was given in relation to this. We don't know the standard practices or mechanisms or how many times this has happened in the past. For my part, I'm quite interested in all these things. So I've been digging around, applying for documents from the archives from, back in John Howard's period to see whether or not there were circumstances in which a minister who was made a minister in one portfolio was then given responsibility for a different department. Maybe it happened then, maybe it didn't. But Problem is, we don't know because all this stuff is still secret. So I think it'd be helpful to have, at least the documents released, the historical documents as well, so we can just see as a matter of practice how this thing has been done in the past. And in looking at those things, we could probably learn a bit more about, what needs to be fixed up. Is there something else out there that's related that's also not being published? I mean, we're all a bit blind to this hole in the system. So I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at it to make sure that there aren't any other holes or other ways for people to get around things as well, and just to have a better look, particularly at how the public service operates in relation to making things public and what the rules are. So I'm less concerned about holding an inquiry. I don't think it has to be bigger than Ben-Hur and full of royal commissions, etc. I think an in-government inquiry would probably do the trick, but I think we just need to know a little bit more about what went wrong and why.
Yeah, good points, well made. Thanks for joining us, Anne. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome.